President of P&G Global Prestige, and she's responsible for all our fine fragrance brands like Hugo Boss, Gucci, and Dolce & Gabbana, and our prestige skincare line, SK2. She leads a $3.5 billion business, and she spent 24 years of her career at P&G. Could you please welcome Joanne Cruz? Our second panelist is the president of Unifen Singapore. She's also the managing director at Temple Bridge Investments. She was voted Woman of the Year for Business and Finance by Women's Weekly magazine, and her world's 50 most inspiring women under 40. Would you please welcome Trina Liang Lin. Our third panelist is the Head of Public Affairs and External Relations for Southeast Asia for McKinsey & Company. She's worked previously as a senior diplomat at the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and she has been closely involved in McKinsey's Women Matter initiative, advocating the value of gender diversity on boards. Please welcome Penny Burt. And our fourth panelist today is currently co-chair and founding committee member of Board Agenda, an initiative of the Singapore Council of Women's Organisation that provides a focal point for empowering, informing and creating greater awareness to encourage women's advancement in senior leadership roles and into the boardroom. Please welcome on stage Juanita Woodward. And to be our moderator for the panel discussion, I'd like to welcome Mr. Kirpal Singh. He is internationally renowned for his work in creativity, innovation and cross-cultural engagements, including having written several books on the subject. He is the Associate Professor from SMU. Please welcome Mr. Kirpal Singh.
Thank you, Victoria. And good morning, one and all. Those of you who are used to seeing me on stage will note that there is a difference this morning, and that is I brought along this book. Normally I do it without books, but I was told that today is special because it's International Women's Day, and having had my grandmother always admonish me about books, I thought I'd better just carry one, just in case. Now, both the institutions that are responsible for today's event, P&G and SMU, are very known for diversity. So it's very interesting. So let me begin by just putting a broad platform for everybody. If P&G had been founded by other people, would it be the same P&G? You know, I mean, William Procter and James Gamble, right? One an Englishman, candle maker, the other Irish soap maker. I mean, you can't think of more diversity there, right? I mean, that's already diverse, isn't it? I mean, English and Irish. Even more interesting, I mean, the two guys only came together because they married moving two sisters. If they had not married the two sisters, maybe there would be no P&G. You know what I mean? It was the sister's dad that said, hey, you guys better get on to get some money making into here, right? So that's very, very interesting. So thank you. It's a wonderful and useful little tidbit to just digest as we go along. That diversity, while being very current today, actually dates back, I mean, centuries, maybe even millennia. What I'm going to do is to begin by asking each of our wonderful panelists to speak for about 2 minutes on their own area of expertise and experience in relation to diversity and inclusion. So maybe we'll begin with Joanne. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. How are you? It's a pretty diverse audience that we have here today. I guess just answering that question, in 1837 when Procter & Gamble did start, I think it's pretty important that the values that Procter & Gamble stood for were delighting the consumer and also really looking after our employees. And I think that's what's really sustained throughout the history of the company, and I hope we'll be able to talk a little bit about that today. And at P&G and to myself, diversity and inclusion is a competitive advantage. It's not just a business case. And I've seen many instances where we've been able to flourish and have terrific employee satisfaction and also great business results out of diversity. And more importantly, thought diversity. You see, I see diversity as really tapping into each and every individual and also making sure we create the right environment so that people can really unleash their potential. And if I think about some great ideas, Gopal, that I hope you'll ask me about, Pantene hair fall control, Downy single rinse, Pampers, I'd love to share how diversity sparked the ideas and the brilliance there. And what's important in P&G, we're actually trying to tap into more consumers in more parts of the world more completely. And for any of you that are at P&G, you would have heard that mantra a lot. But what it actually means for diversity is being able to mirror our organisation so we can best serve the consumers in those markets. But really all of that means nothing unless you get the inclusive behaviour. Sure, you can recruit diverse talent, but if you really don't set an environment up and the systems in place and make sure that leadership are advocates, then it really will go nowhere. So I find that it's not just a business case, it's actually a competitive advantage and one that truly unleashes the behaviour and therefore the results of the organisation.
Thank you. I really love that word, unleash. We're always talking about having a leash in Singapore, isn't it? Be very careful. So I think that's very important for diversity to be something triumphant. So, Penny, may I just jump to you now and ask what your thoughts are? Just 2 minutes.
I might actually just speak from a McKinsey perspective, first of all. And say McKinsey, like P&G, firmly believes in the value of diversity to corporations. We believe that internally, we're a global company, highly successful, but we make diversity an absolute priority. We put our money where our mouth is, so globally we've done leading research on gender diversity. Some of you might be familiar with our Women Matter reports. We actually have just commissioned Women Matter for the first time ever in Asia, and we're looking forward to having those results to share with people soon. But I am going to do the consultant thing and share with you a few numbers, if you can bear with me. Don't vote against me. McKinsey believes firmly, and we say this loudly, that there is a clear business case for women. Just in terms of the numbers, it's worth noting at the macro level, women's participation in the workforce globally has made a huge difference to economic potential. In the case of the US, basically, between 1970 and 2009, women went from holding 37% of jobs to holding nearly 48%. That made an enormous difference in the US economy. Basically, without those women in the workforce, the US economy would be 25% smaller today. 25%. If there's not a business case there for getting greater female participation in the workforce, I don't know what the business case is. If you actually move and look at the level of the individual corporation, both Catalyst International, and perhaps Vanita, you'll talk more about that, and McKinsey have done research which actually shows that companies with more women at senior levels, and specifically on boards, perform better. Catalyst found a 26%, again, a big number, a 26% difference in return on invested capital between companies with 19 to 44% women on their boards and those with 0 female directors. In our own McKinsey Women Matter research, I'm going to share with you some insights on Singapore, which are not yet publicly released formally. We've analysed companies on the Singapore Stock Exchange and, not surprisingly, found that there's a correlation between performance and women at senior levels. Again, our numbers suggest that between 2008 and 2010, companies with 3 or more women on their executive committees have generally return on equity about 2.7 times those with 0 women. Now, if you're running a business, return on equity matters. And 2.7% makes a difference. We've also found that more women at the top correlates with organisational health. That's in the points you're making, Joanne. To have a healthy organisation, diversity actually is a key spur to what you're doing. We've found that in our surveys in Europe and the US, companies with more women at the top tend to have broader leadership capabilities, improved decision making, better corporate governance, and greater market responsiveness. To up on your point, companies that are more diverse and reflect their client base can better understand what the clients need, what the customers need, and actually respond to the market. I might stop talking about the business case there and hand over to others to give you some more numbers. I would like, later in this discussion, to maybe talk a little bit about the obstacles to diversity and to hear from people in the audience as well as my fellow panelists why it is that we're still talking about this 20 years after I entered the workforce. Because really, I thought it was different for my generation, and yet those obstacles are still there, and the numbers, while I've set out a great business case, when you look at the level of women represented in corporations, and particularly at the most senior levels, we're still absolutely not there. Thank you.
Thanks, Penny. Thank you very much. Since you did sort of prompt me to call Marintia first, I'll move on to you. Yeah, with the numbers.
Good morning to everyone. And big thank you to P&G and to SMU for this invitation this morning. I'm the co-chair of Board of Gender, and I hope that you've heard about us. We're a new initiative in Singapore. In fact, this Friday will be our one-year anniversary. And our aim has been really to create an awareness in the community and a better understanding about the importance of gender balance in the workplace, and also the advancement of women in senior roles, and especially into the boardroom. Now, if you didn't quite get our name right, that's Board Agenda with the ER at the end. So putting gender onto the board agenda, okay? Now, we've run a lot of activities, events this year. We've also done some research. And what I wasn't expecting was, you may have read some headlines in the Financial Times that the EU, on this topic of boardroom, is actually looking to consider quotas for women in the boardroom. Here in Singapore, I would say this is a very new topic, and we've been supporting what's been going on here with research. We've been very pleased to do research with the NUS Business School, Corporate Governance Center, and last year we launched some research looking at how many women are really sitting on the SGX listed company boards. The answer to that was 6.9%. Now, hopefully you saw the Straits Times this morning, and we actually see that the statutory boards here are quite a bit higher, almost 20% female representation. So we think that if you take away, we think gender diversity is very important in the boardroom. If you take away one thought from me today, to think about a gender diverse boardroom just makes good business sense. So maybe I should stop there?
Yeah, perfectly fine. I mean, we are, after all, sitting in a very interesting auditorium here in SMU. So I wouldn't hold you to account for your work at NUS, but never mind. We are all for diversity. My boss is right here. So. Okay, my old friend Karina now.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for the invitation to speak here today. I just want to introduce myself a bit again, because it may be a bit confusing. I am president of UNIFEM in Singapore, and I also work in the finance industry. Professionally, finance is my work, and UNIFEM is my volunteer job. Before I became president of UNIFEM, I was also the president of the Financial Women's Association. That's the women bankers in Singapore. So frankly, I'm a professional president, I think. But before finance, I was really interested in development economics. And when I was in NUS, I would have been in SMU. I actually had a very strong interest in development economics, and I was asked to help Professor Chan Hing Chi set up the Singapore Institute, the Singapore International Foundation, SIF. So my links with development economics actually go back quite a ways to the 1990s. I've always harbored hopes of joining the World Bank or the IMF, but wasn't smart enough to get in, so this is one way of me getting into development and economics through UNIFEM. I have 2 points today to bring up, 2 fairly controversial points. The first point I want to talk about is the women's role in nation building. Now, if you go back in history, women's emancipation obviously started after the World Wars when, with a lot of men out at war or getting killed, women needed to come in to support the workforce. And at that time, women started taking on jobs. In communist China, around the same time, Mao Zedong also recognized the power of women. He said, women for the family, yes, but also women for the state. So there was a deep awakening of women in economic development during the 1940s, 50s. Post-colonization as well, women's roles were redefined. So the human capital and value of a woman started changing, where before you had a situation where men and women were valued on strength. How much can you lift? How much can you pull? As countries industrialize, it's the women's skill set. You know, you could stand toe to toe because of your skill set. So, because of very utilitarian reason, women came into the workforce. Still, gender inequality existed right up till 1962. Up until 1962 in Singapore, can you believe that in the civil service, women doing the same jobs as men would be paid just 80% of what men were paid? Okay? Not only that, once you get married as a woman, you would be downgraded to temporary staff, and all your pension would be taken away. Now, 1962, this is 2012, it's 50 years ago. That's not very long ago, but I'm sure for the Singaporean women here in the audience, that would be some amazing historical information, isn't it? So, in the rebuilding of countries, as we're seeing in Arab states, gender equality and putting gender at the forefront of negotiations of the building of states is very important. So you're seeing this in the Arab states. I've seen this personally firsthand in Aceh. I'm seeing it also in Cambodia, where you insert a woman in nation building so that women's views are heard and seen in everything from transport, communications, to even defense. After all, it is basically an issue of fairness. Women represent 50% of the votes of a country. We pay 50% of taxes, and so we should have about 50% of the voice. My second thought is this. Does the political system in Singapore sort of mirror the image of women in Singapore? So for example, if you look at the parliament today, there are 21% of women parliamentarians. However, at the cabinet level, there are no women. And it's almost like the board situation in Singapore, where you have a lot of women in very senior positions, but at the very top, there is a glass ceiling. Yeah? The other thing I want to talk about was that for 14 years, there were no women in government in Singapore, from 1980 to 1994. And during that time, the Singapore Graduate Mothers Program came in, and there was a lot of discussion about it. And it was only after that that the PAP fielded 3 women into government at the time. The last point I have to make is actually with regards to Juanita's point on boards. Why women may not be as representative in boards could be because if you look at the statistics of Singapore in 2011, at the age group of 20 to 29 years old, women outnumber men at the highest professional levels, 55% to 45%. So that would mean that women at that age group actually hold the highest paying jobs. Now, if you go on to the 30 to 49 age group, where it's really the prime of your life, your earning power, women's percentage representation starts falling behind. So I'm just going to throw it out to the audience before I stop, that perhaps that is one reason why we're not making it into the boardroom as well, that women who just sort of fall off. Okay, I'll stop. I think I've gone on for too long anyway.
Thanks, Rina. All right, we've seen and heard many points of view, but because I was also partly under instructions to make the discussion fun. So let me begin by saying that a typical man, right, I mean married, finds himself in a rather interesting and unusual situation. He's got at least 3 women to contend with. One, his wife, to begin with. Then the wife's mother, the mother-in-law, the dreaded mother-in-law quite often. And then, of course, he always listens to his own mother, which is always very interesting. So what I'm trying to say is that the idea of diversity and inclusion immediately gives rise to contention. Because the moment you put the ugly with the beautiful, there is going to be some kind of interesting either engagement or boycott or some kind of articulation of, I don't know, issues. Right? Then you refer to the fact that some of the old obstacles are still there from your experience, both from within the government, related sort of areas as well as businesses. Now, one, I mean, are we all agreed on that? That the old obstacles are still there, or is the new technology creating new obstacles? Or are new businesses getting beyond those obstacles and actually now very proactively seeking diversity? Joanne? Yeah.
Okay. I think, sure, some of the obstacles still exist, whether it be legacy, tradition, education even. And I was just actually sparked with 2 thoughts that I was going to share that happens or has happened in my experience at Procter & Gamble. And it does span 24 years, so it does go back into the history of when you were actually talking before about those diversity numbers and why they haven't changed so much. I think one of the things is when you talked about the conflict that happens, I had an interesting example with Pantene hair fall control, actually, just to use an initiative we launched. And it was funny, it was a Thai brand manager, female, who went straight directly to my boss, who is a man, and was trying to push why women in Asia were wanting this product. She'd spent a lot of time with the consumers and basically had found out that women were really frustrated about hair falling out into their brush or breaking, and they called it hair fall. It was really interesting when she was talking to my boss, he completely disagreed that we should be launching an initiative like that because would the product really do what it said? And we believe in products that work. And the interesting dilemma was that he was actually a man without any hair. And so he came at it from a very interesting point. And it was to her credit, she knew her business, she knew her consumer, she'd heard from them, and was able to really put forward her case in an environment where in the end we were able to laugh about it. Now it's a point of market entry for products in the hair care business. And the second thing that sparked to my mind was the experience you talked about with women, Trina, coming out of the workforce. And it's something we've called the M curve for a couple of years. So I'll face the audience because I think you guys all know about it. But it starts off with recruitment, and you have a high population of women, to Trina's point, and then they drop out over time because of household focus, children, marriage, and then they come back in after the children are through school. And I was in Japan from 93 to 98, and there was also the conflict of the mother-in-law feeling uncomfortable about the wife actually working. And Procter & Gamble really wanted to make great inroads in Japan with a lot of great Japanese talent there. And so actually went about focusing on changing the M-curve. And whether it be the systems or the support structure we put in place, we've actually found through equality of compensation, through the same training and development, through systems that we were able to provide like flexible work hours and partner sharing of jobs, we were able to recruit not only the best, but also keep them. That's why I see it as a competitive advantage. We actually today still have more than the average competitor with our female representation. And I'm really proud to say our business results have been pretty good as well. So hopefully that's the case for it.
Thanks, Joanne. I was just thinking that, I mean, even